Tell me more of the Feydrich stones.
They will fall, one by one, until they are too weak to hold back the terrible light. The power of the Fract will corrupt the land and all that is good in it. At first it will be small things, but they will grow. So we must gather allies and plan.
I knew I must plan the stones well to lend as much chance to the travelers as could be. I made them from 1-inch thick foam insulation to give them a sense of authentic geology. I made them hexagonal in shape, like gigantic basalt columns, as if the stones had been created by some volcanic cataclysm, and then carved by the artisans of sorcery. I remember that a regular hexagon can be created by putting 6 equilateral triangles together. Each of these equilateral triangles can be bisected to make a right triangle with internal angle measures of 30 degrees, 60 degrees, and 90 degrees. With a triangle like this, the side lengths are then proportional to the numbers 1, 2, and the square root of 3. I used this information to figure out how wide a section of my foam insulation I should cut in order to be able to make a regular hexagon. The calculation I made came up with a number a little bit over 1 1/8 inch, but in order to have enough material, I decided to make it easy on myself and use 1 1/4 inch. I cut the foam insulation with a long-bladed utility knife. To keep my cut strips square, I used a very square piece of particle board to guide the blade. This would work with any long blade, as the blade pressed against the particle board will remain square to the particle board unless it bends. I want the stones to be imposing, so I cut them with a height of 4 inches, which would be 20 feet high in the scale I use to play D&D. After marking my 4-inch increments, I cut through using the knife only at every other mark. This allows me to make a very straight base for each of the stones, but to make a natural stone texture at the top. When this kind of insulation is broken rather than cut, it makes a texture that simulates stone fairly well. In order to make these stones hexagonal in their general shape, I estimated a 30-degree cut and sliced off each corner. The way I visualized this to try to get a good hexagon is to leave an amount of foam on the edge next to my cut equal to the length of the cut itself. That way I end up with 6 equal sides. I was in college, I did a lot of rock climbing in the basalt columns of the Columbia River Gorge. These columns, I hope, will remind me of those great pillars of stone. In order to be able to carve a rune and have it be very prominent, I need a face that's a little bit larger than these 6 equal faces. For my first attempt, I cut both the face and the area below the face, but for my second attempt, I broke it off, giving a better rock texture and some interest to the shape. Cutting away all of these faces gave me an idea that I could make a test to see if my runes would look the way I wanted them to. I started off by using a ball of aluminum foil to give rock texture to the cut faces of these scraps. I then used 4 different methods for making rune shapes, all the same runes so that I could compare them equally. For the first two, I used pens that have an ink that dissolves the foam, leaving the rune shape recessed. For the third, I cut the shape of the rune with a knife and then used a pencil to press it in. And for the fourth, I carved the shape completely with the knife. I then painted the test pieces with the colors that I thought I would probably use on my actual stones. At this point, I know which of the methods I want to use to make my runes. I'm going to cut them out. I think I may want to make the runes look as if they are glowing with an inner power. I'm trying to do this by painting them in with red and then making a sort of object source lighting coming from the glowing runes and illuminating the rock around each rune. Through, I decided that I also wanted to try out a color scheme that I used on the wizard Elidar on his scroll, which seemed to work pretty well, and that is purple with blue to make a sort of glow, and those runes ended up looking really magical. So I tried those as well. It turns out that I'm not very good yet at painting object source lighting, and I'm not really convinced by these glowing runes. So even though it was interesting and educational to try, I'm not going to do Feydrich stones. While I want them to look massive and important, I also want the stones to look as if they are held up by some mystical power and are therefore nearly unbalanced. So I'm going to make the bottom of each of these pillars narrow by tearing away sections of the foam. This will give, as I mentioned earlier, a nice texture to the foam, because tearing away a piece of the foam leaves a convincing rock texture behind. I'll keep the scraps for later use. This is no good. A heavy screw driven into the base of each pillar ought to give them a little bit of weight, and because it's at the bottom, it will help keep them upright on the game table. Here I'm convinced that they will look imposing. To give a rock texture to all of my cut surfaces, those that I wasn't able to tear away a piece of foam to make, I employ the time-honored tradition of a crumpled up piece of aluminum foil. I want all of my runes to be approximately the same size, so I cut from a piece of thick paper a sort of template that I can draw my letters in. They aren't really runes, they're just letters, but of course if I was making these for gameplay rather than for a video, I would use some runes that I've developed for my game and use again and again. Time to cut them out. Here I add apparent fractures to this stone by making a small cut with a knife, very shallow, and then increasing its size with a pencil. This is one of the methods that I tried out as a way of cutting the runes, and I'm glad I didn't use it because now it has great contrast with the actual runes. Adding these fractures enhances the sense of delicacy and weight that I'm going for with these stones. Here I use a mixture of black paint and Mod Podge to protect the foam. I learned this from the channel Black Magic Craft. Paint them with a dark gray paint. Then hit them with a light gray dry brush. It's actually a pretty heavy dry brush, and I cover a good portion of the stone with the lighter gray. This will give our initial bit of contrast. We'll continue with more methods for increasing the contrast. A slightly lighter dry brush with a tan color to give it a bit of a more earthy tone. Then some very thinned down black paint that will creep into all of the crevices and give yet more contrast. Because some of that thinned down black paint or black wash is settling into areas that would be illuminated from above by the sun, I have to get some off with a paper towel by dabbing them. Yet more highlighting by dry brush with an off-white color. They're really starting to look a bit like stone to me now, but they still look a little bit boring. I want them to look special. I used a sponge to dab a little bit of red on the rocks. It's actually a dark red, and some of my players think that when I do this to my rocks it looks like bloodstains, but I'm thinking of it as something like garnets forming in the stone, or even rubies. Usually I follow the dark red with a silver, but because these stones are extra special in my story, I'm going to use gold. The reason I use sponges instead of a brush is that I can get into the cracks and crevices with parts of the sponge, and so I don't end up with brush strokes of gold, and it looks more like a natural mineral deposit. I hope these stones will stand the test of time. Where are we going now?
There is a man who lives near here. His name is Torvald Tvenga. He has a small hut that we can stay in for the night. We'll be safer there. There he is now.
If you have enjoyed this story or the techniques shown herein, please subscribe and like.